We think of our neighborhoods, our homes, and our holidays as safe havens, right? But what happens when that trust is completely weaponized against us? Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really unsettling reality, the terrifying moments when predators hide in plain sight. So, what actually happens when evil wears a mask? It sounds like the plot of a cheap horror movie. But consider this. What if predators are using our most innocent traditions to commit the unthinkable? Think about Halloween. It's supposed to be fun, right? Candy, costumes, community. But as we're going to see, that exact atmosphere creates the ultimate camouflage for some deeply sinister intentions. Look at this quote. It hits the nail on the head. Halloween uniquely complicates the concept of safety because the night is defined by intentional fear, masking genuine threat within theatrical play. It's a chilling psychological twist. The chaos, the anonymity, it literally gives criminals an immediate advantage. They can commit horrifying acts right out in the open, and nobody even notices until it's too late. Section 1. The perfect disguise. There's this massive, jarring contrast between what we expect and the dark reality. On one hand, you've got kids in costumes, neighbors handing out candy, just harmless fun. But on the other hand, we have documented historical crimes where killers literally blended right into the crowd. They took a beloved tradition and turned it into a nightmare. So how did they pull it off? Let's actually trace this through history because the timeline is shocking. 1957, Los Angeles. A dentist gets shot at his front door by a masked woman. He probably thought it was just a late trick-or-treater. Then, 1974, Ronald Clark O'Brien, infamously known as the Candyman, uses the urban legend of poisoned candy to cover up the murder of his own son for insurance money. Just let that sink in. 1979, the brutal toolbox killers grabbed their final victim right outside a costume party. And in 2007, out in North Dakota, a killer in a white mask blended so perfectly into a party crowd that onlookers actually thought the brutal crime was a prank. They used the holiday as a literal shield. But what happens when the mask comes off and the threat moves closer to home? This brings us to some vital data from the Congressional Research Service, an agency that tracks missing children. And what they reveal shows a really disturbing shift. The danger doesn't just stay on the streets on Halloween night. It creeps into the broad daylight of our own neighborhoods, and eventually right into our own homes. Section 2. The Summer of Fear. Let's rewind to the year 2002. We saw this rapid, terrifying string of high-profile child abductions that absolutely dominated the news cycle. In February, 7-year-old Danielle Van Dam vanishes right from her bedroom in San Diego. Then June hits. 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart is taken at knife point from the bedroom she shared with her sister in Utah. The very next month, 5-year-old Samantha Runyon is abducted right out in her front yard in California. How could this be happening? The really critical thing to understand here is just how brazen these crimes were. We're not talking about kids getting lost on their way to school. They were taken from their bedrooms, from their front yards, places we all consider absolutely safe. It entirely shattered that old idea of stranger danger. Add in the 24/7 cable news cycle of the early 2000s, and it created absolute nationwide panic. Parents were terrified. But was this actually an unprecedented wave of kidnappings, or was something else going on? That leads us to Section 3, Media Panic versus Reality. 1.3 million. Take a second and just let that staggering number sink in. According to a massive study cited by the Congressional Research Service, roughly 1.3 million children were reported missing in a single year. Now, when you hear a number like that, the panic seems totally justified, right? But hold on. Because in investigations like this, statistics always require context. And context is everything. When investigators broke down that 1.3 million, a very different picture emerged. Nearly half of those kids were runaways or kids forced to leave home. The vast majority of the actual abductions, they were committed by family members, usually because of custody disputes. That tiny little sliver at the end, the stereotypical stranger kidnapping that was blasting on the news 24/7, it was incredibly rare. And importantly, nearly all missing children were eventually returned home. So here's the twist. The so-called 2002 abduction epidemic. Researchers and journalists later realized it was actually an epidemic of saturation TV coverage. Statistically, child abductions were actually down in 2002 compared to previous years. The intense media focus was really driven by how brazen the specific crimes were, plus a post 9/11 climate where Americans were already on edge. But what about the kids who were taken? What happens behind closed doors? Let's explore that in Section 4, Surviving the Unthinkable. I want you to hear these deeply chilling words from Philip Garrido. He's the man who kidnapped 11-year-old JC Dugard and hid her in a secret compound for 18 years. He actually wrote on a blog, "The Creator has given me the ability to speak in the tongue of angels in order to provide a wake-up call." He genuinely, fully believed he had a religious justification for what he did. It is a terrifying look into the psychological deception of a predator. But you know what? The darkness of that quote is completely overshadowed by the incredible discovery of what happened next. Because the resilience of these survivors is just mind-blowing. JC Dugard was eventually rescued, and she went on to found the JAC Foundation to help other trauma victims. Elizabeth Smart, she authored a survivor's handbook, wrote a memoir, and launched a massive advocacy initiative. Michelle Knight and Gina DeJesus, who survived 10 years of captivity in Cleveland, both authored books on healing. Gina even started a center for missing children in her own community. They didn't just survive the unthinkable, they took their power back to protect others. Which brings us to Section 5, How Society Fights Back. You've definitely heard of this one, the Amber Alert system. It was actually born out of a terrible tragedy, the 1996 abduction of 9-year-old Amber Hagerman in Texas. Local broadcasters and police realized they needed a better way, so they teamed up. Now, the second a child is taken in grave danger, law enforcement hits a literal switch. They blast a public emergency alert across highways, radios, your cell phones. It instantly turns every single citizen into an investigator. It was a total game changer. But the Amber Alert is just one piece of this giant puzzle. The government started rolling out some serious systemic defenses. Have you heard of Team Adam? Named after John Walsh's son, it deploys retired, elite investigators to help out local cops, totally for free. Then Congress passed the PROTECT Act in 2003, making sentencing mandatory and standardizing the Amber Alert network. Plus, we've got the ICAC task force hunting down predators online. We are actively fighting back, and the system is getting more sophisticated every single day. And the work never stops. The Congressional Research Service is constantly gathering data to fuel the ongoing legislative debate on how to keep kids safe. Every day, investigators are learning more about how these predators actually operate, whether they're hiding behind a plastic Halloween mask or an anonymous computer screen. We're constantly adapting our laws and our community responses so we can stop these tragedies before they even happen. So that leaves us with a really tough question. How does a society protect its most vulnerable when the predators look just like us? Whether they're wearing a cheap costume mask or just hiding behind the friendly smile of a neighbor. It's a really delicate balance, right? Being vigilant without losing the freedom to just live normal, joyful lives. There isn't an easy answer here, but looking at the real evidence, seeing the unbelievable strength of the survivors, and understanding the tools we have, well, it's the best place to start. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions and stay safe out there.